I'd like to welcome to the CGOA podcast, Cliff Barackman. Many of you know Cliff from 9 seasons, I think, of Discovery Channel's Finding Bigfoot. 9 seasons, is that correct?
I don't know. Seasons are made up by the network. You know,
Right.
they're not. They don't.
And it's not
really
9
exist.
years for sure.
Well, it was. We filmed the pilot in 2010 and aired the last one in 2018. If you don't count the special that came out, so
that's true.
That's how you count on your fingers, I guess.
Yeah, and Cliff is also the owner and operator of the North American Bigfoot Center in Boring, which is a fantastic museum. We'll talk a lot more about that later, but certainly encourage people to check that out. It's a great place if you have any interest in Bigfoot or cryptids. And he also does a podcast with fellow alumni James Bobo Fay called Bigfoot and Beyond, correct? That's the name of it?
Yeah, Bigfoot and Beyond with Cliff and Bobo. We put our names in the titles. It'd be easy to find. Yeah,
it's very entertaining. Listen to it all the time. So welcome. Thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah. This is a music oriented podcast, right? Because it's an orchestra association. So I got to start with a little music talk. I know you're a jazz guitarist. Tell me about that.
Oh yeah. Well, I got a degree in music back in the day. You know, I worked hard at that. And I eventually went on and became an elementary school teacher and whatever else. But, you know, to become an elementary school teacher, you have a couple options. You can either major in something called liberal studies, but I'm not even sure what that is, and it didn't sound fun or cool. Or you can major in one specific thing and then take some tests to show that you're proficient in all sorts of things. Right. Well, I'm a jack of all trades. I'm an expert in none. So I decided, well, you know what, I'm going to get a degree in something I really want to be good at, I ended up studying jazz at Cal State Long Beach under the tutelage of a guy named Ron Eschte. Who is a master 7-string guitar player and one of the best guitarists, in my opinion, probably ever. He's kind of one of those unsung heroes. You know, he took lessons himself from Joe Pass, who most people know who Joe Pass is. But Ron was, he was a frontman in a couple projects, but really his thing is making everyone else sound good. And that's one of the most important lessons I learned while taking lessons from Ron. He said, I can play, I know chordal structure, I know harmony, I know all that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, if somebody notices you and your name isn't on the bill, you're not doing it right, because there's times to be flashy, of course, but your job as a musician is to make the person who hired you sound good. And I think that's important.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, this is the 6 degrees of separation thing. My wife, when she was a librarian, worked with Joe Pass's ex-wife.
Oh, no kidding. No kidding.
And of course, I was raised, I grew up in Torrance and Redondo Beach.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah. So we're nearby. We're both music people and we're both teachers, right? So we have a lot in common that way. Did you, what kind of format were you playing? In trios, in big band, jazz, with everything?
Well, what was your
format?
I did big band when I was in college. I was in like the one band or whatever they called it. But ever since then, it's like I did a lot of solo stuff because that's one of the benefits of a 7-string jazz guitar is that it has a low string on it. It's a low A if for any guitar players out there. Right. So you don't have to change any of the chord voicing, shapes with your finger. You can just drop it down another string and have an entire other octave lower. So that really opens the door for chord melody work. So I've done when I was working, I haven't done a ton of work as a musician, but I've certainly done gigs by myself, like at restaurants and bars and stuff like that, for money in a professional setting. So those I always try to do alone or in maybe a duet because the pay is better at the end of the day. But I've been in more than my fair share of bands as well over the years, from when I was in high school and I didn't know what I was doing guitar yet, all the way up until I was doing some really peculiar, quirky sort of Zappa-esque Primus sort of angular monk influenced rock stuff.
Yeah,
I'm not even sure what that stuff was.
With the 7-string, man, you start to explore like alternative tunings with the 7-string. That would kind of blow your mind.
I never liked it, because I never got the hang. I never really changed my guitar tunings so much. I played a little bit with the open tunings, but I never really felt I got the hang of the traditional tuning well enough to actually change it. Let me get really, really, really good at that one. But then again, I know very few musicians who think they're good enough who aren't trying to hone their craft. So,
oh, for sure. Are you still playing?
I try to. Bigfoot has really taken up most of my time. I don't hop on the guitar as much as I'd like. I do have another friend. His name's Nate, and I went to music school with him, and he just moved over to Washington. So he's about an hour away or something like that. So we try to get together every couple of weeks and, play through some charts and that sort of stuff. And really my schedule is prohibitive as well, because I'm so busy. When before we started recording, you asked how I was, and I said busier than I'd like to be.
Right.
And that's kind of the way I've been rolling lately, between owning a business, running the podcast. And, people think, oh, you only have to talk an hour a week. How bad can a podcast be? Well, I have to schedule Bobo. And that's not exactly
That's the challenge
easy.
right there, right?
Well, yeah, because if you've seen the TV show, Bobo.
Yeah.
It might be a little bit of a challenge to nail him down for some stuff, and then of course I'm on the road a lot. I just got back from Tennessee this past weekend. That's the second to last away gig I have. I've got to go to Kentucky here in a few weeks, but I have a nice long 3-week break between these two jobs. So yeah, it's extraordinarily busy, and I wish I wasn't. Trying to kind of say no to some things and pull back from some stuff. And, but that's very hard for me because I tend to give more than I have, unfortunately.
Yeah, I've been there. I'm trying to learn that skill myself.
Well, yeah, it's just a mental health thing,
Yeah, sure.
I shouldn't be stressed out at night when I have nothing to do because of what I have to do in the near future. And so I've found myself being a little stressed out lately about things that are like next week or whatever. And say, well, I've overcommitted myself, so I need to, just a little self-care. I think we all get to that point, but it's not easy to make a living on a Bigfoot thing. So I'm very, very fortunate.
Yeah,
I'm hustling
sure.
and stuff. But
that's true. Just before we get into the Bigfoot thing, who are your influences as a guitarist? Who do you?
Oh gosh. Well, obviously Ron was a huge influence, and Joe Pass, of course, as well. But if you go outside of the jazz realm, I think I was probably very influenced by, frankly, Oingo Boingo. The 80s band or whatever.
Danny Elfman,
well, particularly Steve Bartek, the guitar player there. He was a guitar player for Oingo Boingo, and and they're not your average pop band. I mean, they may sound like it and stuff, but Danny Elfman was at the helm there, and he's a pretty ingenious composer in many ways. And what he did in the music, there'd be measures of 7/8 in the middle of the song, and then like a very peculiar harmonies and stuff. So that kind of stuff, and any of the guitar players that ever played for Steely Dan. Steely Dan in general was a very big influence on me because of that sort of New York jazz thing in a rock format that's very subversive, and they're playing in elevators, but like what they're singing about is very inappropriate. So I really enjoyed that kind of stuff too. So and if you want to talk
and hyper polished too,
Oh yeah.
So they have that element of anarchy, but it's extremely tight and.
Controlled anarchy
really
is what
controlled.
it is.
Absolutely.
Subversive controlled anarchy where you're not quite sure what finger they're showing you, so
yeah, I listened to a podcast interview with Danny Elfman, and he went through the whole history of Oingo Boingo. Pretty interesting.
Started with
his brother
with that movie and stuff.
Yeah.
The Mystic Knights of the Oingo Boingo and stuff, and they were pushing the limits even from the early days.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Okay, so here's a question: bridge the gap. What's the connective tissue between jazz, your interest in music, and Bigfoot?
Well, I guess it would have to be. I became an elementary school teacher. I majored in music because you had to major in something, and I went on to be an elementary school teacher. And I started in the Bay Area, then moved back home to Southern California for a while, then eventually achieved escape velocity and got out. But essentially, that gave me summers off to go poking around in the woods. And I never worked summer school or anything. I wasn't interested in doing that sort of thing. I personally need a lot of space and time in my life for me to proceed well. So I would spend most of summers in the woods, essentially. But when I was in college, going to music school at Cal State Long Beach, the music department was way on one side of campus. And of course, I had to take things outside of the music sphere. So I was on the other side of campus this one term. And I found myself with a break. It was like 2 or 3 hours. I can't remember how long it was, but it was just long enough where it didn't make sense for me to go back to the other side of campus because the campus was so large. It took 40 minutes to walk from one side to the other, So I just long enough of a break where it seemed like a waste of time to go back. I couldn't get off campus because my car was in the music department area. And so what I did is I basically went to the library. And Cal State Long Beach has a wonderful library. And I would wander through the stacks and pull books off of the shelf in subjects that I was interested in, mostly sciences. I'm a science nerd. I just really enjoy learning and science and astronomy and marine biology and all sorts of stuff. And then one day I found myself in the anthropology section, and I came across a compilation of journal articles written about Sasquatch. Sasquatches from the perspective of scientists.
Mm-hmm.
I said, oh, this is interesting. And I've always been interested in the Bigfoot thing, but just like I was interested in Atlantis and UFOs and the crystal skulls and weird stuff. But I never really necessarily took it seriously beyond like, that would be cool.
Mm-hmm.
I never knew the science behind it until I ran across this book. And then I read
there
that.
was even science behind it.
All right. Yeah, that was
Right.
an amazing thing for me to discover as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, I basically plowed through that book pretty quick, found another book just like it. And then I started reading books. I think the next book I ran across was Dr. Krantz's book on the subject. And then I started doing the John Green books. And then before long, once you're actually exposed to the evidence and you're starting to think about these things, before long, you're kind of asking yourself, how could this not be real? Like how, and like, because there's questions like, like how is it that I'm going to say literally, because I think it's true, literally every indigenous tribe in North America has stories of giant hair-covered people-like things in the woods outside of town. Mm-hmm. From Florida to Maine to British Columbia, it doesn't matter. And they're internally congruent in description and behaviors. Like, how could that be true? Were the native people conspiring against the genocidal wave coming from Europe that they didn't know was coming? And it's like, let's get ahead of these guys and fool them now. No, that doesn't make sense. Like, how could it be true that when anthropologists have kind of looked at the footprints and found markers in the footprints, landmarks, that they can kind of remake the bone structure, I guess is a good way of saying it, the bone morphology underneath the skin based on these landmarks that they can observe in the footprints. Well, it turns out that they're different than humans, and the way that they are different than human foot structure is exactly the way that would be necessary to carry a biped of their mass in a bipedal fashion. Mm-hmm. Again, are the hoaxers are the hoaxers aware of human biomechanics and foot morphology? And were they talking to each other to plant these subtleties in the footprints? I doubt it.
I mean, they might be now because all that information is out there, but they certainly weren't at the beginning.
No,
they weren't in
the
19th century, in the early 20th century.
Well, no, and we have footprint casts, and the earliest footprint cast that's still in existence is from 1958, and that footprint shows the features that weren't published until 1999 when Dr. Meldrum published his work on the midfoot flexibility of the foot, and Dr. Krantz reconstructed the foot bone morphology based on the Bosberg footprints, and those were left in the winter of 1969. But yet we can see those same things in the footprint casts from the 50s. And all through the early 60s. And that seems remarkable to me. In fact, it seems ridiculous that it would be attributable to anything but evolution. And so, I mean, once I realized, like, oh my God, these things are probably real. I mean, they're not just some, sociological icon or some, Jungian archetype or something. They're like real animals. That's when I decided, well, I'm already camping and backpacking and stuff. I'm just going to start doing that in places where people have seen Sasquatches and see what happens. And I just got lucky. I found footprints and stuff on the first time out. So it just kind of snowballed from there.
And that hooked you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And here I am 27 or so years later, drowning in the subject. Basically.
Yeah. Speaking of drowning in the subject, let's talk about the museum really quick. Where does the collection come from? Is it mostly your stuff or things you went out and found to bring back? I mean, how did you acquire your collection for the museum? A little bit everything.
A little bit everything. Yeah, I started. See, I am fascinated by the evidence, by the physical evidence.
I know you have a very large cast collection.
Yeah, I started collecting footprint casts. Actually, my first cast was actually a knuckle cast from the Paul Freeman collection, and he got in 1982. I got the cast in like mid 90s sometime. It wasn't too long. The very early days of the internet, Dr. Krantz was selling some footprint casts online, and I got two, I think, from Dr. Krantz at the time. I got the knuckle print from 1982 in the Paul Freeman collection, and then I got a right foot from the Patterson Gimlin film. Those are my first two casts, and I was broke at the time. I think $20 was a big spend for me at the time. So I didn't even get them at the same time. I couldn't afford it, but and then from there, somebody else had a cast, and I learned how to make a mold inside like wet sand and poured that. And then from there, just kind of slowly snowballed and now here, quite a few years later, I don't know, I have 300 or so. I'm not really sure how many we have. Dr. Meldrum and I talk about that sometimes. Like, how many do you think it is now? So I don't know. But it also depends how you count them, whether you include human casts for comparison purposes, or fake casts that we know are fake, or orang-pendek casts, or other casts from other animals in other parts of the world.
Mm-hmm.
But 300 or so. So a lot of them come from and I think that the casts are important evidence, and I want to kind of highlight those in the museum, because I have a lot of them. First of all, it's easy.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy for me to do because I have so many. But also, I think it's striking evidence that once you understand how the Sasquatch foot works and how it's different than humans and why it's different than humans, why that's a necessity, and you're seeing all these casts from all these different parts of the country and indeed the world in some cases, cast by different people in different places at different times, and they're all internally congruent. That's significant. I think that's a very significant thing. And of course, being a Bigfooter for so long as well, I spent the first probably 8 or 9 years of my Bigfoot career just doing it alone or with my close friends who weren't really in the Bigfoot community. Mm-hmm. And then I eventually started branching out and meeting other Bigfooters and being invited on trips. And that happened in the early 2000s, like maybe 2000 or 2001 or something. So I started meeting a lot of people. And I'm very fortunate that I haven't stepped on too many toes and that sort of thing. And people seem to like me or tolerate me well, at least. A lot of people have been very generous with their evidence and sharing their research with me, and kind of putting our heads together. And so a lot of the other stuff in the museum here comes from other researchers who I know and trust and like, and I consider friends.
You guys just did an expansion, right? You're in the middle of doing that?
Oh, no, yeah, we did a little expansion. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Just a little bit. We'll probably put up another dozen or so displays. We're kind of trapped in a fairly small building.
Right.
And it was an old motorcycle garage is what
Mm-hmm.
it was. So we have real high ceilings in the back and a nice big area for displays. But still, it's not my building. I'm leasing it. Yep. So I can't build out. So right now we're using our space as wisely as we can. We have a little bit more room. There's this nice closet that we haven't pushed into yet. And when I say closet, it's about 20 feet long and about 8 feet wide. So that'll give us another probably dozen or more displays nice. once we get that done too. So we have a little bit more room, and then we can start building like up a little bit and try to put things out of line of sight, pushing it up. And
yeah, it's too bad. It's too bad you can't build out or around. That would be because it's a great location.
Yeah, I like the location a lot. Yeah, I don't know if I'll ever be allowed to buy the building or if I'll have to move eventually if another building comes up, if a better location. But for now, I'm real happy here, and I think we can pack this place full. My goal is to eventually, when people walk in, I want them to get smacked in the face by like, wow, there's a lot of stuff here, but not in a cluttered sort of way. I want to avoid the clutter. And
talk about Murphy a little bit. Murphy is very impressive. I love Murphy.
Yeah, Murphy. Murphy is our life-size realistic Sasquatch model, I guess. It's made out. He is made out of foam. He's about 7.5 feet tall. He was made by a creature, monster maker out in Columbus, Ohio. A gentleman named Bo Bruns, who runs a monster making studio called Unit 70 Productions or Unit 70 Studios. I can't remember which one. Bo brought Murphy to the Ohio Bigfoot Conference a number of years ago when I was speaking there. And when I saw the model, I said, wow, that is by far the best one I've ever seen. Because there's a lot of models like the one behind you on the screen, for example, they're cute, they're fun, but they don't look like a real Bigfoot does. No. They're kind of cartoonish in a way.
Right.
And so when I saw Bo's masterpiece, I went, wow, that's fantastic. And then Mark DeWorth, the organizer of the event, introduced me to Bo Bruns, and I said, hey, what would it take to get this? We struck a deal with each other. And basically he shipped it out. Now it's here, and it is a fantastic model. He sculpted it. In fact, on our display in front of Murphy, we have pictures of Bo Bruns actually making Murphy and the process that he did. But yeah, it's basically injection foam that has hair individually placed, I think, all over the model. He's 7.5 feet tall. And right now I commissioned a chainsaw carving artist to make a duplicate of Murphy out of wood for a chainsaw carving in front of the shop, so we're kind of expanding on that too. But Murphy's real close because we get a lot of witnesses here at the North American Bigfoot Center, a lot. In the height of summer, we probably get 10 a week in the shop or more. And then, some of these people had seen Sasquatches at very close range, less than 50 feet, and sometimes broad daylight. So with those people, I invite in the back, and I said, hey, here's Murphy. Nitpick it for me. Tell me what's the same and what's different. And they do. And for the most part, they go, yeah, there's longer hair here. The skin was a slightly different shade of color or whatever. But that's all real close. And one guy, he came in, he's this gentleman, he came in the shop and he saw a Sasquatch this past April out in Skamania County, Washington. He almost hit it in his car, in fact. And he swerved, and then it was right there in front of his car in the headlights. And I measured it. He was 12 feet from this animal, and the animal's glaring at him right in the headlights. One of his headlights was kind of cockeyed because one of his kids hit a pole or something in the car, and it made the light go up. So it was lit up and everything. And I brought him in the back, and I said, hey, man. And I was looking over at Murphy, check out Murphy. Tell me and I look back, the dude's crying. The dude is crying. I remember on an episode
of the podcast, the guy basically had PTSD after seeing it again, right?
Yeah. A lot of witnesses do. A lot of witnesses. A significant proportion. I wouldn't say over half, but I'd say 20% have some level of PTSD after seeing a Sasquatch. Yeah.
So what's the, I know you guys did an episode of the show in Parkdale at Solera. I remember that, right? I was living in Parkdale at the time. I lived there for about 38 years. Never had an encounter, never heard anything.
Real Squatchy area though, man.
I know it is. And I was disappointed after all that time. So what is the Squatchiest area of Oregon, do you think?
Oh, well, wherever they are,
specific, but
well, wherever they are is the real answer because, because I used to think that Sasquatches were a wide-ranging species, no telling where they're going to be, but the evidence is showing otherwise at this point. The data that people are collecting indicate that the same animals are hanging out in the same general area. And so, wherever they are, basically, outside Estacada is a good area. Down the Clackamas River, there's a spot down there by Ripplebrook that kind of has them that hanging out in that general area. There seems to be a group over by Colton. There's another group way back there in the Malala area. I mean, so it's just, where do you want to go? I mean, there's somebody saw one in Stevenson, and someone saw one a year before that in Stevenson, just 2,000 feet away from where this guy saw it. So there's a group in that area. I know there's a group over there in outside of Parkdale, because the Dalles watershed has a bunch of sightings. Police officers have seen them inside there and everything. So yeah, I mean, wherever they are is a really good Squatchy area. But where people hear about them being is where people are and the Sasquatches are. Because to have a sighting, you need to have a Sasquatch and a person at the same place. And then the person has to be willing to share that information, which is actually a much larger obstacle than most people would think. Most people don't share their Sasquatch reports. And I think it's a conservative guess to say that I hear about 1% of what actually happens in my area.
So, that brings up an interesting thing. So, we have your podcast, there's the, Wes Germer's podcast, right?
Sasquatch Chronicles. That's by far the biggest.
Been going for a really long time.
There's Wes is a friend of mine. Actually, Wes gave us a lot of advice and direction with our podcast. Actually, he's a friend.
Been listening to him forever. And there's the there's at least 3 or 4 others, right? That are basically.
Oh gosh, everybody and their mother has a podcast, right? And so many people in the Bigfoot
many of them are basically witness accounts, right? Call-in witness accounts.
Yeah, people love that. That's not me. That's not me. But but. Yeah, because humans are a mythological sort. Well, we're not mythological ourselves, but we love mythology. We love stories. The vast majority of our history, it was oral tradition. Writing really only came about in the blink of an eye a couple hundred years ago. 400 years ago, the printing press or whenever that was. But before that, humans have been around for at least 300,000 years. And for most of that time, we were storytelling. So people love the stories. I love the evidence. I'm not a people person. I love the evidence.
Well, what I was thinking is, there's say 5 podcasts that are nothing but stories. They've been going on. Do you think there are people that call up all those shows and do their stories over and over? Or
sure.
Professional storytellers about Sasquatch, they like to tell
yeah. And people see, that's another thing about the whole Bigfoot thing is that whether they're, you don't have to be a liar either. I mean, a lot of people hoax some people hoax footprints, but they hoax stories or whatever. But really, even the people who are telling the truth, they kind of learn that they like the attention sometimes. And that's one of the things I learned early on is that when people give me sighting reports, I never say their name
Mhm.
because I don't want people coming to me for attention. I have 1,200 sighting reports, almost none of which are published, because I don't want to bring people attention. And for me, it's not about the people; it's about the animals. It's about Sasquatches, and we humans have a tendency to fall into this idea where it's about the witnesses, and to some degree it is. But I'm going to protect the witnesses, and if they want attention, they want people to know they saw a Sasquatch. Well, I'm going to protect them from that too. They don't know what they're asking for.
That's a good point.
I don't publish names unless I absolutely have to for some other compelling reason. And so people will find out very quickly. If you're going to tell me about their sighting report, you're not going to get any attention from it at all. And honestly, at the end of the day, so what? You saw a perfectly normal animal. How is that going to further the study of the subject at the end of the day? Right. Now, don't get me wrong. Sighting reports are important. The most recent sighting report we had was about 2 days and 2 weeks together. So 2 weeks ago, this past Monday. And this is about 8 or 10 miles away from where I'm sitting right now. I went up there. I scoured the place for 5 or 6 hours that day, found a couple of footprints, the whole line. That's important, because there's another dot on the map where I have about 3 or 4 other dots on the map within a mile or two. That's important. Found a couple impressions. That's important. I saw one run across the road back in 97. What is that? That is a dot on a map, is what that is. And it may have changed the witness's life. And I don't want to play that down in any way. It's very personally moving and personally important. But for me, who's heard 5,000 stories just like it, it's just another dot on a map, unfortunately.
Yeah. Do you feel like so all the podcasts and all the interest in cryptids in general has sort of diluted the impact of the legitimacy of Sasquatch research, because it bleeds into so many woo things, dogmen, and all that kind of stuff? I mean, do you feel like that has sort of negatively impacted the Sasquatch phenomenon or research, or the way people view it, because it's kind of lumped in with those things?
Yeah, certain aspects of everybody and their mother having a podcast and a voice on Facebook, et cetera, certain aspects have been damaged, in my opinion. I think hoaxes damage the credibility of the subject, because hoaxes are what the skeptics always point to. And who's going to deny that? Yes, indeed, there are hoaxes, but there's also things that have not been shown to be hoaxes that, in my opinion, cannot be hoaxed. And I think that lumping Sasquatches in with other paranormal phenomenon is also a huge mistake, and it doesn't serve the subject well at all. I think that does a tremendous amount of damage to the credibility of the subject. And I'm certain, probably, I imagine some of your listeners think that Sasquatches are paranormal, probably goring their sacred cow to some degree. But I'm an evidence-based researcher, and why should I believe someone who tells me that they're doing things that are unsubstantiated by evidence? Like, why should I? I think that we should all raise our standard of critical thinking and evidence to a level where, like, just because somebody says it doesn't make it true. And that's true of Sasquatches as well. Just because someone says that they're a hominin or an ape species or whatever category you want to put them in doesn't mean it's true, unless there's evidence to support that. And when I hear the paranormal community, bellowing at me, they're very upset at me, because I just kind of poo-poo a lot of it. And by the way, weird things exist. The universe is not only weirder than you think, it's weirder than you can think. I am way on board with weird stuff. I'm a weird guy in general. But after all the evidence and stuff that's been collected, it doesn't seem that Sasquatch is one of those things. Right. They might do a couple things that nothing else does, but it doesn't seem like that. But when the paranormal people some of them say that they're UFO, right, and interdimensional stuff. Some of them say they're not from this planet. Some of them say they're from inside the hollow earth, inside the planet. Some of them say that they are angels. Some of them say that they're devils. Some of them say that they are forest protectors. Some of them say that they're tree spirits. So, and you get what I'm saying? None of that stuff agrees with one another either. Why would I believe any of that, right? Unless the evidence shows that. And so far, the evidence shows that they're pretty normal animals. They don't really do anything all that spectacular for the most part. And if they are UFO riding, shape-shifting, interdimensional whatevers, why are they eating roadkill, man? Why are they digging through the trash can? Why can't they just go to the holodeck and order a steak sandwich?
Absolutely. So you mentioned our listeners. I think our listeners are probably generally very unfamiliar with Sasquatch and cryptids in general. I mean,
I forget there are people like that.
Yeah, there are. Yeah. I mean, we know, but these are people listening to a music podcast about orchestra music, so might not be the same Venn diagram. I'm not sure. So maybe just two quick questions. I know you got to go, but question one is, for the people who are totally uninitiated, how would you define a cryptid in general? Just one sentence. What's a cryptid to you?
Cryptid is an animal that has yet to be discovered and recognized by science.
Mm-hmm.
And cryptid, by the way, that comes from the idea of cryptozoology.
Mm-hmm.
Crypto is a Greek word that means like hidden, and then zoology is a study of animals. So the study of hidden animals or animals that are not yet recognized by science. So a cryptid is a term for an animal that's not yet recognized by science.
And then my next question is, what if I was going to ask you right today, what do you think is the single most compelling piece of evidence for Sasquatch? Not Footcast as a general rule, or not the Patterson-Gimlin film, but I mean, what do you think is, you had to have one thing in your museum that was the most compelling single piece of evidence, what would it be?
I get that question all the time.
I'm sure you do.
And that is, and there is no answer for that, because like one thing alone out of context isn't very important. But when you look at the footprint cast evidence, for example, one particular cast, you can say, oh, that's interesting. Look how there's features there that are clearly indicative of ape anatomy and non-human and human ancestor anatomy, the flexibility in the mid part of the foot. Well, that's all fine and good. That's really neat. But did you know that you can see that same feature in the Patterson-Gimlin film? You know, the Skookum heel cast, you can see that same feature in that cast as well, the elongation of the heel, which is a consequence of the redesign of the foot. So that's kind of like saying, hey, look at this puzzle, this jigsaw puzzle, this 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle. In which of these pieces is the kitty in the mug that's going to be the final picture? In which of these pieces is that kitty the prettiest? You can't do it. Well, you can, but the it's kind of it's an empty answer, because it's not about that one puzzle piece. It's about the puzzle in general, that when you stand back and you look at it, you go, oh yeah, that is look, it's a kitten in a mug, you know, but this piece isn't going to show it. You might be able to see the eye or the whiskers or something, but and so one cast or one piece of footage is that.
It's cumulative for sure.
Yeah, if I had to say one piece, it would be the Patterson-Gimlin film, because the Patterson-Gimlin film supports the footprint cast evidence. It supports the idea that this is some sort of relict hominoid. It supports what the Patterson-Gimlin film actually predated and predicted future finds in paleoanthropology. So if I had to say one piece of evidence, it would be that. But the PG film isn't going to convince anybody. But knowing how the PG film is congruent and supports the footprint cast evidence and the other hand evidence, or the hand cast evidence, and in primatology, like all that's what's compelling. That's what you can't like turn your nose up to when it comes to Bigfoot evidence.
Cool. Well, I was kind of feeding that question. I kind of predicted your answer, but I know a lot of people, think that way. If we just had this one thing, we could just put it to rest. And it's
well, that's true. That one thing is going to be a dead body.
Sure.
Yeah. That's unfortunate, but I mean, I didn't write the rules, but those are the rules. I'm not trying to shoot one. I'm not a gun guy. I've got a couple firearms, but I'm no means a gun guy. I know gun guys. I'm not one of them. But that's not going to be me pulling the trigger. I don't even deer hunt. I just can't do it. And man, imagine what a frightening situation that would be, to having pulled a trigger on a Sasquatch and it ran off.
Yeah.
Well, that's not cool.
Anyway, I'm sorry you can't come and do our narration, but I totally understand. I think people are going to really enjoy this. What we're doing, this piece is called A Sasquatch Portrait. And it was sort of inspired by, I don't know if you know Aaron Copland's Lincoln Portrait, very famous, a piece from the 40s. And I thought at first, well, that would be kind of a funny substitution, but then it kind of went beyond a joke. So the first movement is actually the paleoanthropological evidence for Sasquatch, and the second movement is a witness report, and the third movement is Native American stories about hairy man, and then the fourth movement is sort of these questions, kind of exactly where we started. If there isn't Sasquatch, how did this happen? If there isn't, how did this happen? So it's kind of these open-ended questions. So I think people are going to really enjoy it. I know the orchestra's enjoyed performing it and rehearsing it. We're kind of in this witness report chapter, we're kind of blending the Sierra sounds with orchestral instruments.
Oh yeah, Ron was just in the museum this past weekend. I was out of town, but Ron came by the museum to say hi, and I wasn't even here. Ron Moorhead, the guy who got the Sierra Sounds, and
he's released them on CDs. I know, right?
Yeah.
The greatest hits. Well, tell us where people can find you on the internet.
Oh God, you throw a rock far enough, you're going to hit me. So
where do you want them to find you? How about that?
Well, a lot of people track me down just to throw rocks at me. It turns out that's what Facebook seems to be good at. Kind of like let's show everybody what mental illness I have. Everybody seems to do that on Facebook. So anyway, obviously I'm on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. But not only is Cliff Barackman on those three things, you can also find the museum, the North American Bigfoot Center, and also the podcast, Bigfoot and Beyond with Cliff and Bobo. And of course, each one of those three entities, Cliff, the museum, and the podcast, has their own separate website as well. CliffBarackman.com, NorthAmericanBigfootCenter.com, and Bigfoot and Beyond Podcast.com.
That's awesome. Well, if you ever want to come to the Gorge and play some music, hit me up. I can hook you up with some people. We could do some things. We have a big band, and we always love to have people come in and play with us. So,
fun!
I don't know if we've ever had a 7-string guitar player come.
Yeah, it's just guitar at the end of the day.
I know, with another string, right?
Right.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, Cliff. I appreciate your time.
All right, thanks so much, Mark. I appreciate you.
All right, have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.
And they really did live happily ever after.